That's my work.
Completely.
Yeah, that's my work.
Coming to the conclusion that the British establishment
Tell her that's my fucking work.
to the verge of total.
Yeah, that's my work.
This evening, the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak announced
Tell her
he's
that's
gonna
my
do
fucking
a
work. Yeah, that's my work. That work. Tell her that's my fucking work. That work. That's my work. No amigo got that work. Tell her that's my fucking work. That's my work. Tell her that's my fucking work. That's my work. That work. Riding dirty, it's like 7:30. Right lane while my tires burning. Drink while my stomach's hurting. Workaholic, boy, I'm always working. Build my wave, then I fucking surf it. Landscape for all the surfing. Wake up to the same shit. Lame shit, I see it everywhere. You can't tell me nothing about struggles if you was never there. You can't face my people and think that we just gon' run in fear. And ain't no way in hell you can tell us we don't belong in here. Fuck a wall, Trump.
In the middle of a vote on Israel-Gaza, and there can be no cause that you can use to justify the support of a prescribed terrorist group like Hamas. And yes, you can freely criticize the actions of this government, or indeed any government. That is a fundamental democratic right. But no, you cannot use that as an excuse to call for the eradication of a state or any kind of hatred or anti-Semitism. This week, I've met with senior police officers and made clear it is the public's expectation that they will not merely manage these protests, but police them. And I say this to the police: we will back you when you take action.
Okay, what's going on here then? Well, it's clear who's going to be held to account for the mass slaughter of Palestinians through bombs, bullets, starvation, the destruction of Gaza's medical system. It's clear who's going to be portrayed as the real dangerous, bad people in all of this. As Israeli soldiers shoot children in front of their parents, babies have their limbs amputated without anaesthetic, 2 mothers killed every hour, children perishing of hunger while families make bread from animal feed to survive, credible reports of Palestinian women being raped by Israeli soldiers, paramedics being blown up as they try and save terrified children who are then themselves killed, for most of Gaza's civilian infrastructure being severely damaged or destroyed. Who's going to be really portrayed as the baddies as desperately hungry Palestinians are massacred as they try and get flour for their starving families? Who is going to be the villain in the piece? You guessed it right. The people who oppose the slaughter. That's who's being portrayed in this country as the real hateful extremists, those who oppose the biggest mass slaughter of children in a conflict in recent times, orchestrated by a far-right government in Israel whose leaders denounce the Palestinian people as human animals and Nazis, and who have repeatedly issued blood-curdling statements about destroying Gaza, and to be fair to them, oh boy, have they stuck to their words. Why is all this happening, you might legitimately ask? Because our establishment know that the scale of the crime being committed against Gaza is simply too great to hide. They know that leaves them morally exposed. So they're playing a game of deflection. No, we're not the real dangerous extremists. The ones who oppose the mass slaughter are the real dangerous extremists. Crucially as well, they're trying to silence anyone who can hold them to account over what they've done, particularly as the true scale of the horror becomes ever more apparent. Now, in this speech, Sunak denounces George Galloway's by-election win in Rochdale. Now, Galloway just won for a very straightforward reason. That's because Labour decided to back the mass slaughter of the Palestinians, up to and including the leader of the Labour Party, Keir Starmer, backing Israel's right to cut off water and energy to civilians, a war crime which he later claimed he never believed despite having said it. Now, a rational response to the Rochdale by-election is to acknowledge the strength of feeling so many have about the historic crime being committed in Gaza. And I say that as no fan of Galloway, to say the least. Someone whose undeniable oratory skills and campaigning abilities have been wasted because of the multiple reactionary political positions he's taken and alliances he's made. But a Prime Minister using a national address to denounce a by-election result as a threat to democracy. Yeah, that's giving sinister, isn't it? Let's be honest. Now, his claim, Rishi Sunak, is that extremists have taken over the streets and hijacked protests. Let's just be straightforward and direct here. This is a lie. It's a manufactured deceit. The mass protests in Britain, which reflect overwhelmingly public opinion, the polls consistently show that support for an immediate ceasefire has a huge majority of support behind it. That's what this is really about. The political elite see a mass movement which reflects where the public are. They resent it putting pressure on them because it's effective. So they try and present that pressure as dangerous, threatening extremism that has to be stopped. Now, as I keep saying, it's got no relationship to the truth at all. There are very few arrests at these protests, significantly fewer than large football matches. It's really wild, actually, when you see politicians and media outlets come together to create a narrative based on a total pack of lies. They just think that if you keep saying something enough times, it just becomes the truth. But what we're seeing here is a case study in how authoritarianism takes hold of societies. I'm sure many of you have read books or watched documentaries about how societies succumb to authoritarianism. It's exactly like this. You create a moral panic about dissenting voices. You portray them as dangerous extremists who will unleash terrible violence at any point unless they're stopped, who threaten the entire social order and fabric and national unity, and who are useful idiots or fifth columnists for hostile foreign foes. That's what's happening here. You can see it. You know, I read this tweet by someone called Robert Colville, who is the director of the Centre for Policy Studies, a very well-connected right-wing think tank, and the co-author of the 2019 Conservative Manifesto. Very revealing, to say the least. Well, you see, there was a protester heckling Rishi Sunak during his speech, which a lot of journalists got very annoyed at, which, again, it's like, get your priorities straight. So Robert Colville tweeted, protesters shouting angrily in the background of Sunak's speech kind of proves his point. Does it? Really? Okay, so I think this is actually quite a useful point being made here about how Rishi Sunak and others are conflating the right to peaceful protest, however annoying you might consider it. Peaceful protest is often seen as annoying throughout history. It's supposed to annoy powerful people. Conflating the right to peaceful protest with violent intimidation. It isn't even subtle. Heckling politicians is a centuries-old tradition. In a democracy, you can heckle people who rule you. It comes with a package. The sort of countries where it's illegal to heckle politicians, they ain't democracies. Now, we already have a raft of legislation clamping down on protest. The right to protest is already thoroughly demonised. We're heading in a direction where the right to protest is being made impossible, that anything other than voting is being portrayed as threatening and incitement. And you know what's interesting? We keep hearing politicians and media allies going, oh, politicians are being pressured to vote against their consciences. This is intolerable in a democracy. What are you on? Have you never heard of the whipping system? Political parties have whips who are in charge of discipline, whose literal job is to make sure MPs don't vote according to their conscience. Indeed, they've got a track record, these whips, in threatening politicians into voting the way they want, destroying careers, even compiling dossiers on private lives with the intention of saying that if you don't vote a certain way, we're going to leak your affairs, buddy boy. There's no more panic about that, is there? Instead, the right for people to build collective pressure on MPs is being demonised. That is a key ingredient in a democracy. The idea basically is pressure and even threats are okay in a democracy, but some form of collective pressure from people who aren't part of the Westminster set, that's intolerable. That's tyranny. Now, a lot of our social progress was won by people building pressure on politicians. They didn't like it. That's the point. But that is now being construed as violence. Now, look, if we're talking about extremism and division, are these people just devoid of shame? Honestly. Genuinely, though. No government has fostered so much division as the Conservatives. That's their purpose. They're constantly trying to turn people against the hate figures of the moment, generally vulnerable minorities who lack a voice to be able to defend themselves, benefit claimants, migrants, refugees, trans people, we could go on. All their demagoguery during the Brexit palaver, remember all that? Right-wing media allies, the Tories, splashing things like enemies of the people with pictures of some judges because they asked for some more democratic oversight of us leaving the European Union. Crush the saboteurs? We could go on. Indeed, the Tories are a cesspit of Islamophobia. They never got meaningful scrutiny of that with Boris Johnson as leader after he compared Muslim women to letterboxes and bank robbers, triggering a huge increase in hate crimes. But now, despite former Tory Vice Chair Lee Anderson being belatedly suspended over his gratuitously Islamophobic comments, which Tory ministers refused to condemn Islamophobic, and a load of Tory MPs were up in revolt over it, that aside, no action against Suella Braverman, our former Home Secretary, for suggesting Islamists are running the country. Now, the Tories are a racist party. They're an ever more extreme political party. As we see here, they're becoming ever more authoritarian. They're coming for our rights and our freedoms. They were won at huge cost and huge sacrifice by our ancestors who were demonised at the time as dangerous extremists. It's not for us to allow those rights and freedoms won at such cost to just be taken away. And for the right to protest and to put pressure on our rulers to be construed as violence. This is what dictatorships do. And if you care about democracy, you should be very worried indeed. Please like and subscribe. Keep the show on the road on patreon.com/ownjoes84. Share this video. Listen to the podcast. Speak to you soon.